Hi everyone, welcome back. How's it going? Today I'm going to continue with my series of videos on 1980s science fiction films, notable science fiction films from the decade, some more well known than others probably. But today I'm going to talk about the Dead Zone from 1983. I have the DVD right here. This film was directed by David Cronenberg, starred Christopher Walken, based on the Stephen King novel, which was published in 1979, and have my old used paperback of The Dead Zone right here with Stephen King. And we're really getting into the era now where there's a lot of Stephen King adaptations, especially in the mid 80s, but really it's never stopped. I mean, really ever since then we've gotten a steady stream of Stephen King adaptations, and it's never really slowed down since then. But it is especially interesting, I think, to go back to this earlier period where different filmmakers are adapting Stephen King. People like Brian De Palma directing Carrie, or Stanley Kubrick directing The Shining, and many other examples. But by the mid 80s, Stephen King was really becoming a brand, and to bring David Cronenberg into the Dead Zone, I think really made this one of my favorite adaptations of a Stephen King novel as well. I know there were some other directors involved, according to Wikipedia. Stanley Donen, who was an old Hollywood director, and some other names. Cronenberg, who I talked about earlier. I talked about Scanners and talked about Videodrome, which also came out at the start of 1983. And Cronenberg has said in interviews that he was interested in doing a story that was not one of his own scripts, to try adapting a novel. And I know this movie went through many scripts. Cronenberg worked on the script, and Jeffrey Boehm got the a credit for the script, and he would go on to write. Boehm would write Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, the Lethal Weapon 2. I know he would do a lot of big movies of the 80s. And Deborah Hill, who was a producer on The Dead Zone. Of course, she had worked with John Carpenter on his films. But from what I've gathered, she also made many contributions to getting the script for this movie. Stephen King also wrote a script, which, from what I've read, was mostly like his novel, almost identical to his novel, so they really wanted to streamline it and try to get to the essence of the story. I know some of the earlier screenplays took a more documentary approach, but the final one they decided on was really telling the story from Johnny Smith, the protagonist of the story, really telling it from his point of view. And that was a really good decision, I think, because it's, throughout, as we watch this movie, it does a great job of helping us to emphasize with Johnny and what he's gone through at this point. So the cast of this film, as I mentioned, Christopher Walken, one of my favorite performances he has. I'll talk more about why I think his performance is so well. And we also have Brooke Adams in the film. Who was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake. Tom Skerritt, great actor, appears as well. Herbert Loam plays the doctor who treats Johnny. Anthony Zerbe, another really good character actor who's been in lots of great stuff. So they really got a great cast together for this movie. It was filmed in Ontario, throughout Ontario, Canada. Of course, the novel is set in New England, King's New England, but I guess Ontario was a good stand-in for New England in this case, and they were lucky when they filmed it where they had a lot of snow. So it's such a wintry movie, and it's a perfect horror movie to watch, I think, in the winter time, because of the authenticity of the setting that they used. So a really good cast. Just to talk a little bit about the plot a little bit. So we start out, Johnny Smith is a teacher. He teaches English at school. His life is pretty good. Brooke Adams plays his colleague, who he's also dating, and their relationship is going well. Looks like they're going to to get married, and late one night, Johnny has a horrific car accident and is in a coma for 5 years. And when he wakes up, first of all, he discovers his entire world has changed. Of course, he doesn't have his job anymore. Sarah, his girlfriend, has gone and moved on and married someone else. And he also discovers he has this gift that where if somebody touches his hand, if he touches someone, he can get visions of their future. Okay. And the film is really good, I think, at showing that. Like, the first vision is when Johnny, the nurse, comes by, and she touches him, and he gets a vision of her house on fire, and they're able to stop the fire before it happens. And that's a really creepy scene, the way that is set up, almost as if Johnny is at the house. So yeah, the film does a really good job of that. So he has this gift, and what happens with this character is that other people want to use him and exploit him for his gift, and it leads him to become isolated and looked upon as kind of like this weirdo or freakish type character. So that's the setup to the plot, basically. And I should say, in the novel, it's also set up that Johnny had this ability before when he was a kid, but he never really fully realized it. And it's after recovering from his injuries that he becomes fully aware of it. So there's a great press conference scene where he is questioned about his abilities, and he kind of freaks out this reporter who is, trying to expose him as a fraud or something. That scene is really well done as well. But he is sought out by the police department of Castle Rock, of course, the famous Stephen King city. And Tom Skerritt plays Sheriff George Bannerman. There's been this unsolved killings in the area, and he wants Johnny's help to find the killer. Okay, and not to get too much into that part of the plot, but that's also just really well handled. And the movie is more episodic, and I like that decision too. I think that really worked for the movie to do that. But Johnny is able to go to the location of one of the killings, and he has these terrifying visions of what happens. And then when they actually track down the killer and corner him, that's probably the most disturbing scene in the film, where the killer is cornered in his room, and he does something pretty horrific. And there's also one of the creepier moments in the film too, is when his mom, the killer's mom, and she touches Johnny, and he tells her, he's like, you knew. The Walken's delivery is so haunting there, that her son was committing these awful crimes, and she knew all about it all the time. So that scene was really well done. Other plot points in the film deal with Sarah, and she's moved on, she's married and everything, but her and Johnny kind of continue their relationship somewhat throughout the film, and those scenes are handled really nicely as well. Walken's scene, he tells her, I'm alone and I'm safe, which I think is what his character, a great expression of his character. And also I think the literary influences that were in the novel, but I think brought into the script, where there's references to the legend of Sleepy Hollow and to Dracula, kind of with Johnny's coat he's wearing, and even to Edgar Allan Poe as well, which the movie starts out when he's reading, I think it's The Raven to his class. So there's these nice literary references to the film, but also that wintry setting really adds to the almost gothic atmosphere of the story. And ultimately Johnny really is a tragic protagonist ultimately, and I think that and Walken just does such a great job of expressing that, his tragedy, but kind of his even romanticism he still carries with him as this loner. There's a great scene where he's visited by his doctor, and Johnny's become a shut-in by this point because everybody wants a piece of him. Clearly he was traumatized by helping the police. He ended up getting injured during all that, and he shows the doctor his closet, which is full of mail he gets from people who want Johnny to help him out, and he's like, I can't give them what they want, so that's a deeply moving, affecting scene as well. I know in the novel, it's been a while since I've read the novel, but I know there's like, King gets into like tabloids or following Johnny around and printing sensational stories about his abilities and all that. So that's fleshed out a little bit more in the novel, but I think that scene in the film really gets the point across with how he's feeling so isolated and really can't do. It's an interesting place they put the character. And then the other big plot of the final section of the movie is with it becomes more of a political thriller with Greg Stillson, who is also a character in the novel, and Greg Stillson is this corrupt politician who he's very charismatic but very corrupt, and he is running for Congress or a local election, I believe, in the film. And Johnny has an encounter with Stillson at a rally, and shakes his hand, and he has a very horrific vision of the future of Stillson. Okay, what could be in store for the future of the world if Stillson is elected president? So there's that aspect of it. I mean, it's easy, I think, to watch this film and to find some resonance to what's going on today with politics, but I think just to keep it in the context of the 1980s, this is coming out of Watergate and Nixon and everything, and Nixon being the idea of what a corrupt politician was and how dangerous it could be to have someone who is charismatic and dishonest and corrupt in such high office, and there's also some Cold War anxiety in there of the idea of the president, having the ability to start a nuclear war, very much at the Cold War. I don't know if that's a concern as much today, even though the threat remains, no doubt about it, with these weapons are still out there. In some ways, maybe even more dangerous today. I've talked about that in some of the other movies I've talked about, but there is that Cold War anxiety in the plot, and Johnny faces a dilemma now that he has this knowledge. What does he do about it? And we do get into some subversive territory there, about what he should do with that knowledge, and which is where the story goes, in an interesting place. And of course, ultimately, the question is Johnny on the road to self-destruction? Is he on the road to kind of a sacrifice, like a Christ-like sacrifice, as to viewing the character like that? But like I said, it's all handled really, really well in the film, and they really do a great job with that. I want to say I've seen Joe Hill, Stephen King's son. I know he's talked about the Dead Zone and almost reading the Johnny Smith character as almost a stand-in for Stephen King, who was this, a gifted storyteller in himself, and he's writing all these novels that are becoming big bestsellers and connecting with so many people. And I don't know, I'd have to go back and find that interview, but the idea we're suddenly becoming famous and how isolating that is, and how everybody wanting a piece of you, and the pressures that come with widespread notoriety, and how someone with a gift is treated in our society, whether they're treated as heroes or weirdos or whatever. So I think that's a really interesting theme in the film as well. And there's also themes, I think, of fate versus destiny. Do we, that theme of, do our own actions determine our future, or is that completely out of our control? What happens to us in the future, or is it a little bit of both? As far as trying to navigate, I think that really interesting theme that the movie really handles well. So, yeah, so those are some thoughts on the Dead Zone. Just a few final things. A great score by Michael Kamen, who worked with Cronenberg on the score for this film. It's just a very wistful, haunting score, I think, throughout the movie that really works well. There's the use of locations are great. There's a great scene in a tunnel where they're trying to track the killer, and I believe that was shot around Niagara, Ontario, and it's a real place, and it's just a really, really well done scene, and that in there as well. Yeah, and I think, and looking at this more with Cronenberg, and there's all these discussions too, I think, with these adaptations where it's like you have to talk about the Stephen King stuff, but also you have a well-known director involved as well, and kind of, what they both bring to it and what the final result is. And Cronenberg, I was thinking this film is almost a trilogy of sorts, where it goes along with Scanners and Videodrome and Dead Zone, but maybe even like a quadrilogy of 4 films, because The Fly would come out in 1986, and all 4 of those movies are about a male protagonist. They're all mainly focused on males who undergo some sort of change to them that makes a body change or a psychological change that isolates them in different ways, and so that's interesting how Cronenberg carries out that theme through these 4 films. And I think of all of them, though, the Dead Zone is the most humanistic, I think, of all 3 of them. There's a little bit of nihilism with Videodrome and Scanners, and The Fly is humanistic too, I think, in its own way. But I think the credit goes to Christopher Walken too. Just I wish I could do a Christopher Walken impression, but I can't. I wouldn't try. But just how intense his performance is, and how we're really with him, like what he's trying to do and his decisions, and we kind of feel his isolation and his inner struggle that he's going throughout the film. And yeah, I really think that's really handled well. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Dead Zone. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.